welcome everyone. Today we finished our Spring Speaker Series 2023 at Alexander & Haberman and are hosting Mike Becker to present Planning for Long-Term Care Risk. This is the last of 3 installments of our 2023 Spring Speaker Series, which also included core retirement decisions and Social Security planning. As we get started, I just want to say it's great to have so many of you back here, to be with so many of you again. A special thanks to all our staff who make this possible, including Aaron and Caleb, who are in the booth today, as well as Christian, Zena, Jackie, Nicole, Beth, and Joshua. And I want to extend a special welcome to those of you who are seeing us for the first time, and give a big thank you to those who invited you. Today's presentation, Planning for the Long-Term Care Risk, is presented by Mike Becker with Legacy Financial Partners. As a financial advisor and general sales manager, Mike specializes in building and implementing financial plans for busy families and helping soon-to-be retirees with their retirement income plans. He strives to help his clients by building and implementing a financial plan that is specific to their needs. Mike entered the industry right out of college in 1995 with an internship. Now, 27 years into his career, he has accomplished a number of things. Mike is qualified for numerous company and industry awards, including the Gamma International, now known as Fonseca, Bryan Early Frontline Excellence Award in 2013, and was often recognized as the top branch within his company. A recent article Mike wrote on Social Security planning was published in over 250 news platforms. In 2021, Mike started a family financial planning business called Legacy Financial Partners, LLC. Legacy Financial Partners work with Securities America, Futurity First Insurance Group, and Senior Market Sales to provide his clients financial solutions. Beyond work, Mike enjoys golf and Wisconsin Badger football, and thus a healthy rivalry with Joshua. He also spends his free time with his wife of 15 years, Anna, and their 3 kids. As always, Alexander & Haberman does not practice in the specialties of its speakers, but welcomes them here to speak for the educational benefit of our clients, friends, and guests. Alexander & Haberman is a specialty firm focused on assisting with Medicare Advantage, supplements, and Part D plans, as well as individual and family health insurance, both on and off exchange, and group benefits including health, dental, and vision. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen and send them to the host and panelists. We will respond to them at the end of the presentation. This will also allow anyone who needs to leave promptly to hear the entire presentation. So, to get us started with today's presentation, let me please introduce Mike Becker.
Thank you, Brittany. It's great to be back with you and all of the Alexander & Haberman clients, friends, guests, to talk about planning for long-term care. One of our most sought-after presentations creates the most confusion, or there's the most confusion around this topic. So I think it's always great to be able to talk about maybe different angles around long-term care. So it's great to be back. And as Brittany said, this is the last of our spring series. The snow is finally off the ground, we think. And that corresponds with ending, I guess, our spring series. So this is the 3rd installment, core retirement decisions, Social Security, now long-term care. And we are planning on coming back. I get the summer off, but I will be back in August, September, and October for more presentations. And we've got some tax presentations planned. And if there's ever any interest in different topics, we'd love to hear from you in what you'd like to hear about. We'll start with disclosure, and if you've seen our presentations before, it's great to see a lot of familiar names and faces out there. But I'm not affiliated with the federal government, IRS, any other governmental agency. I don't practice law or do taxes. I'm a local financial advisor that tries to be proactive in planning, so hopefully you can all make good decisions. And really that's a great segue to what these workshops are all about. These workshops really try to accomplish 3 things, or we really try to do 3 things. Number 1 is make these education-based, so you can all walk away learning something about a particular topic. Number 2, we hopefully will motivate you to go do something about the information that you obtained today. And then number 3, it sort of ties in with number 2, is provide resources that you can go to get additional information. So again, you can go back and actually implement or do something with the information you have. And today our focus is around long-term care. We're going to briefly talk about chronic care. We're going to talk a little bit about extended care events and longevity risk, but we're going to spend most of our time talking about what do consumers think. And this is completely different from anything I've done in the past, and hopefully it'll go very well. But I get a lot of questions in my day-to-day planning practice of, Mike, what do people do here? What do people think? Why do people do this? And my hope is some of the information that we'll share with you today will help really answer those questions or give you some of that information. And I think that ties in with really some of the behavioral side of doing planning for your financial future. And I think whenever we think about doing something different, I think on the left side, we often think about risks like long-term care as it's never going to happen to me, right? That's just sort of the knee-jerk reaction. But I think that this behavioral concept is called optimism bias. And I want to start this presentation, I want everybody to think about this, is the optimism bias basically says that we overestimate the likelihood of good things happening and underestimate the likelihood of bad things happening. And thinking about risks and things like long-term care, I think it's really important. The other concept that's not here, but is a concept around really looking for the information that you're looking for. So let's go ahead and move forward with talking about what chronic disability or chronic care is ultimately about. And chronic care is about really substantial assistance in 2 of these 6 activities of daily living. So you can see over here, these are the activities of daily living. Well, why would we potentially need assistance in those 8 daily activities of daily living? Is because of right over here, right? Bad things happening, from accidents to heart attacks, healthcare related things, prolonged illnesses, and of course where we often think about these things is aging and frailty. And that's certainly where a majority of these activities of daily living come in, but certainly there's people at younger ages that need assistance as well. And when we start talking about the care continuum, if we get to that point where we need assistance, where does that care come from? So the long-term care continuum. Well, they start the first 2 places where we're going to spend a lot of our time talking today is spouse takes care of spouse. Right? If you need care, that's usually the first place that happens. And then often kids will get in to provide some care as well. And then it's the traditional long-term care, home care, assisted living / adult daycare, and the nursing home care. So that's really the continuum for the average person that needs assistance in chronic care. And why is chronic care a big deal? Because we're all living longer. And I want to spend a little time around this concept of life expectancy. And if you've seen my presentations in the past, I really think this is important to think about the risks from a long-term perspective, and where does longevity risk or life expectancy really play into it? And this chart really shows what's happened to life expectancy over the last 75 years. You can see it's amazing, but life expectancy has actually gone up 17 years in the last 75. So my calculation, what is that, about every 4 years life expectancy goes up 1 year? That's dramatic. And especially when we think about what's happened to other people in our life and when have they passed away or how long have others lived. I'm not saying that's not unimportant, but this is really important to see what's happening and what's probably likely to happen in the future. And we've also talked a lot about life expectancy tables, that there's the general life expectancy table, what we have here. And then there's another life expectancy table. It says, well, what if you get to age 65? It eliminates accident deaths, infant mortality, a lot of those type of things. It just says, if you make it to 65, how long are you likely to live? And I believe that this is the chart that we want to look at when we're doing retirement planning, which long-term care planning is tied into. And you can see these numbers right here, 50% chance of living to, 25% chance of living to, and I think that's fascinating because 1 in 4, male and female, mid-90s. And if you look at that far right side, I think that's fascinating that if there's 2 spouses living at age 65, 1 in 2 chance that one of you is going to be around when you're 93. That's almost a 30-year retirement. Is there significant longevity risk? What is longevity risk? It's the risk that you're going to live a long time, and if you live a long time, there's a lot of bad things that could potentially happen to you during that time period. So before we get into the long-term care, the insurance, and why people do long-term care, I think this is an absolute takeaway, because these are the 3 decisions that you want to be making when you plan for long-term care. And I'd highly encourage you to take a picture of this or write these 3 things down. But it's pretty self-explanatory. Is where do you want to receive that care? Who's going to provide that care? And then lastly, how are you going to pay for it? Again, I wanted to emphasize this because some people get to number 3 and say, okay, I've made my decision on number 3, self-insure, pay it on my own, or whatever the case is, and they don't think about or discuss 1 and 2. So as you put together long-term care, remember, funding or paying for that is one of 3 questions that you really want to be answered. So the question is, am I alone in my thinking? Whatever my thinking happens to be. It's not that it's right or wrong, but what do other people think? And that's really where the study came in that I think is really a fascinating study. And One America worked with Hanover Research to put together the study a little over a year ago. And what are people thinking? What do people know about long-term care? And so we're going to spend the rest of the time really talking about what do people think around this issue of long-term care. And I think the starting point with this is, why do people have a hard time entering this conversation? Why have you maybe had a challenging time entering this conversation? We just don't like planning for things that we hope never happens. Right? We think that's bad stuff that's happening. And this is just not a lot of fun to think about those things. What did we talk about earlier? Optimism bias. We underestimate the likelihood of bad things happen. And we really quickly discredit something and say that's never going to happen to me. So I think that's really important to understand that as how are we thinking as humans. Now, where do we learn about long-term care? Where's our exposure to long-term care? Well, in most cases, it's pretty logical. It's friends and family. 52% of people really get their exposure to long-term care through experiences with family and friends. It's not so much I go through a health event, that makes me think about it. It's more about family and friends. So where does the familiarity come from? And we really all have some kind of familiarity. To what level of familiarity? But many of us have heard things about nursing home insurance or long-term care planning. So we know that we have some kind of exposure to that. But where does that exposure often come from? Is people we know. And I think that I want to support that by giving you some good questions to ask. If you're talking to somebody in your life, family or friends, about their experience, these are going to be questions that I'd encourage you to write down or take a picture of, because these are questions I think are really important in understanding if we as consumers want to learn through the experiences of others. Number 1, who is the patient? Grandma, brothers, sisters, cousins. Who was the caregiver? And I think it's really important to understand what was their situation? What was the toll on the caregiver? Was the caregiver working at that time? I think that's a really fascinating question. What was the impact on the family's health? Maybe the caregiver, if that was a family member, but how about the other family members? What was the impact on those family members from a health perspective? Who paid for it? And then lastly, how about impact on finances? So these are really good questions. If you do talk to family and friends, again, these are the 5 questions I would use to start that conversation, to really learn about what is the actual experience. And people do long-term care planning for lots of different reasons, as we might know. But really the number 1 is to avoid burdening other people. I think that's fairly logical, but when we think about long-term care, we might let these random thoughts come into our head to say, well, this or that. But I think it's really, the people that do long-term care planning really think about the impact on other people. And that can be financial motivation for people. And this is really where the statistics start to come into play. But why do people do long-term care planning? You can see 52%, or the highest, is to remove the burden from family. There is an element of similar, but making sure that you don't devastate those people that are left behind. So when you think about long-term care planning, it's very personal. I'm going to give you a couple other things to think about, but these are why people typically do long-term care planning. Now, the next slide I want to go through gives the perspective from both the, I'll call it mom and dad, or the person that's thinking about long-term care, and it gives the perspective through the person taking care, or the caregiver. So there's a lot of numbers, and I'm just going to take a moment to talk about this. So these are the perceived risks of long-term care. In the dark blue, the top line, are the concerns from the main person needing care, and the light blue number is for the caregiver. And I think this is very impactful when you think about why do people really look at long-term care. And number one is the emotional toll of those providing care. Those providing care, 87% of us are concerned about the emotional toll. That's significant. The physical burden, this is a bigger deal. This is where the most difference between the person receiving care and the person providing care is, what is the physical burden? Taking care of somebody, moving somebody around takes a toll on somebody. Sacrifice of time, again, a huge variance. Those taking care of people, it's 82% are concerned about the time sacrifice, where the person receiving care, it's only 57%. Again, a major variance between what people are thinking. There is the financial cost, which is one of the lower issues, but that's out there for some people. And then, of course, we have the health consequences, and then we have, lastly, the stress on the family. These are perceived risks of somebody that goes through care and those that have to take care of the person. And I think it's always interesting when we start thinking about care. Remember, we talked about spouse takes care of spouse. Who's next? Kids take care of parents. Now, I think when we think about taking care of parents, there's two pieces. You can provide care, or as a kid, you can manage care. You can provide care, or you can manage care. Now, that's a really important difference, because I think most of us are happy managing the care of our parents, but not taking care of our parents. And our parents don't want us to take care of them. 77% of parents are reluctant of having their children provide long-term care. Maybe it's because of all those reasons we just cited a few minutes ago. Maybe it's uncomfortable. I think that's really important to think about that. How comfortable are we having our kids take care of us? And if that's a concern, it's something that we have to think about with long-term care. Again, where's the service provided, who's going to take care of us, and how we're going to pay for it. And how we're going to pay for it is expensive. And there's a few things that I want to highlight here. The first thing I want to highlight is the Genworth Cost of Care Survey. There's an app that you can put into your iPhone if you have one, the Genworth Cost of Care Survey. I'd write that down. It's a great little application, and it breaks down any metropolitan in the United States, any kind of care, and then gives you the cost today. But you can also do is you can forecast into the future, because that's the second point that I want to emphasize here. If you're 62, 63, 64, 65, planning for long-term care, and you're planning for one of these expenses, should you be planning for what it costs in 2023? Or should you be planning for what it's going to cost in 2040? The app allows you to slide to whatever age in the future so you can see what that cost is. And for most of us, we are constrained investors. That means our income to asset ratio is capped out, that we have to be really smart with our retirement income decisions. Layering on top of that, $7,000, $15,000 a month, most of us in our plans cannot afford that. Let's actually go through an example just to help to put numbers behind this. So this is an example. Remember, we said spouse takes care of spouse, kids take care of spouse, and then we go to home care, assisted living, and nursing home. Well, let's say a person goes in and they get home care first and foremost, and they've been in the home or they are in the home for about 18 months, and then they can no longer take care of you in the home. Then you move on to an assisted living facility that you stay there for 2 years, and then the last 18 months of your life in a nursing home. Well, you can see the price tag on the right side over here adds up in those 3 parts of the continuum to $325,000. That's today's dollars. What's that going to be in 20 years from now? Double? And you can see on the bottom, what if mom and dad spend time in the long-term care facility? In our planning process, we often ask our clients, if you had a choice of leaving your money to the government, nursing home, kids, or charity, who would you like to leave it to? And it's never number 1 and 2. It's always 3 and 4. If you had a choice of leaving $325,000 to your favorite nursing home or your favorite charity or kids, who would you do? That's really what it comes down to. So many inheritances are not going to charities, and kids are ultimately going to the nursing home. So most consumers do not consider long-term care a high priority. How can that possibly be? There's such a need out there, and you can see numbers right here. This ties back to our longevity risk. What is the probability of needing long-term care? And you can see if we live into our 80s, maybe our 90s, 50, 60% chance of needing long-term care. Remember, if we're living longer, and we have to plan for that, right? If it's a short life, that's one thing, but we have to plan to make sure that we plan for the bad things that can happen later in life. That's a high probability if we do live a long, healthy life. So where's long-term care prioritization? We all think it's fairly high. 33% of us think that it's something we really should do. And 46% actually think it's a pretty wise idea to do. So we're probably about 80% of the folks think it's a wise decision. So it's not that it's unimportant, it's something that's on our mind. And 43% of people over here think that it's likely, extremely likely, or somewhat likely that they're going to need long-term care. So half of us think it's going to happen, and every day is a random outcome, so we have no idea, but many of us know or think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen to me. So what are we going to do about it? So why aren't we planning for this stuff is the question, right? If we know about it, we're concerned about it, why aren't we doing it? Well, I think it comes down to prioritization. It's not that it's not unimportant. It's what's more important. And most of us that may be in our 50s, 60s, what would we rather do? We'd rather save and make sure our retirement is okay. We'd rather eliminate debt so we can enjoy our retirement and create emergency accounts so we can enjoy our retirement. We can provide dollars to travel and do fun things so we can enjoy retirement, right? That's what we're focused on. I get that. Long-term care is on the list, just happens to be number 7. It's on people's list, but people want to focus on number 1 and 2. And I think what's important, I'm going to touch on this a little bit later. What we need to do as consumers is we need to have a financial plan, or we need to have an income plan to understand what is our income going to be in retirement. And many of us are doing better than we think. And so maybe we don't have to focus quite so much on number 1, and we can move down the list of items and get to 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 on the list. So again, you can see the percentages of people that prioritize things before long-term care. So what are some of the top barriers? I think we all would probably agree, none of us want another bill. It's the cost. And I'm going to touch on this just in a second, but I think that's the number 1 reason why people probably don't do a lot of risk management. Remember, we don't want to think about plan for things that we hope never happen to us. And then we have number 3. These are really interesting. These all probably come up for all of us, right? Some of those things I think we are put our head in the sand, do not want to think about getting sick, do not want to be cared for others. That's about 35%. A third of us just want to put our head in the sand. And then there's probably about a third that are confused, right? We have lack of information. We have too many options. We don't know where to get information. We're too busy. So about a third, maybe it's just confusion. So where are we? in what's holding us back, right? And I think each one of us can say there's a couple in there that are probably keeping us from taking the next step. But I want to talk about number one, because if this is the number one concern that's keeping people from moving forward with long-term care, what are some things that you could potentially do? What are things that we do with clients to try to, again, get to some of those other priorities? And number one, I alluded to it earlier, build a financial plan, build a retirement income plan. So you know of your resources, what's needed to provide the income you need. And it's likely that you're going to have some resources left over, and then you can start to use those leftover resources to really prioritize. So that is number one, because if you don't have that, the natural tendency is, I don't have enough, I don't have enough, I don't have enough. Until you have it mathematically put in place, which is a financial plan or income plan, you're not really going to know that you're in a good place for retirement. Number two, people often say, well, it's too expensive, and we say, compared to what? And I think there's two ways of looking at that. Number one, compared to $15,000 a month of future care, right? It's substantially less, right? But I think what people are saying is that monthly bill is too expensive, and who's it compared to? Don't compare that to your cousin, your neighbor, your boss, who has a long-term care policy in place. Because number three on that list says $200 a month or $300 a month can go a long way in providing some risk transfer, which is what long-term care is, to the insurance company. So we'd all be surprised we can still do some risk transfer even with a couple $100 a month. Number four on the list is, and we're going to talk a little bit about the term hybrid or asset-based long-term care planning. And that's where we can use maybe we have another need like life insurance or annuities, and we can put combinations of products together to solve multiple problems. And that's really where number five comes in, is asset-based or hybrid products can be used from an asset perspective versus another bill or needing more income to pay for it. We're going to touch a little more on that in a little bit. So who do people really talk to when it comes to building long-term care? I think this is fascinating. There's sort of two pieces in here. The gray bars talk a little bit about who they would trust and then who they've actually spoken with. So 73% of people would trust talking to family members. And I think talking to family members about their experience is one thing. Talking to family members about their expertise in long-term care insurance, probably not the optimal place to go. Probably not licensed, probably don't have a lot of experience about all the different features, options, why people do it. Again, I think it's really important to talk to family members about their experience, but you need to talk to professionals about how to actually build it. I am pleasantly surprised that 40% of people would trust financial advisors. I am disappointed in my profession that only 18% of us have talked to our clients about long-term care planning. Why? Well, maybe that's just not what they do. Doesn't mean that they're bad folks, but we have the responsibility to bring the risk to our clients. Whether our clients want to deal with the risk or not is up to them, but shame on us from a profession of not talking to more of us as consumers about the risk of long-term care. There's a piece that we like to use, and I'm going to reference a couple different places, but if you want a copy of this, go ahead and you can chat nationwide. This is a great piece to facilitate a conversation with kids or family members. We talked about, remember, right? Where do I want care? Who's going to provide care? And the cost of care. This is a really nice piece that we're happy to email out to you. You can use with your kids or your family members to at least, again, facilitate what can potentially be a very uncomfortable conversation. Moving along to current long-term care. So people have done long-term care planning. So we're going to talk a little bit about what people know or have experienced. Now, there's a lot of numbers here, and let me point out a couple things. On the left side here is awareness of long-term care options. How do I pay for long-term care? And really my familiarity. So there's awareness, and I'll say there's really an understanding. So we see 70% of people here have at least know that there's long-term care insurance available, but only 22% really understand it. Here's some asset-based or hybrid strategies, you can see right here, a life insurance and annuity strategy, awareness that it's even available. Not a lot of people are aware, and you can see 21 and 17% are actually familiar with how they work. Again, shame on us as a profession. We need to do a better job. But again, I think a lot of us are making decisions. As consumers, we're not doing something when we probably don't really know what's ultimately available. And there's more and more in the long-term care space. We use this in a lot of our workshops in our planning process. There's a ton of innovation happening around long-term care. Why? Because of the need. And so we'll touch on this a little bit later, but we've got our traditional long-term care, what some people know. And if you're not doing anything, you're in the self-insure category. The number one category is going to be self-insure. We're going to touch briefly on these hybrid solutions, or again, asset-based. We're going to tie those into our consumer survey. More than a third of consumers have no long-term care plan, and have even discussed it or have a long-term care plan. So what are people planning for long-term care? How are they going to solve the problem? Well, you can see right here, 48% are essentially going to self-insure. They're going to use their resources. Why? Because it's the default plan, or they feel like they want to self-insure, which they probably can't do in many cases. You can see very few are actually planning long-term care or one of the hybrid strategies. Very few are planning on actually transferring this massive risk. And we have a whole bunch of people here who have not even thought about long-term care planning. So what are people doing? There's not a lot of folks that are really thinking or planning around how to pay for long-term care insurance. Because in many cases, what are we doing? We're putting our head in the sand, but we're saying things like, well, my spouse is going to take care of me. So what are we expecting? So expected sources of long-term care. Who's going to take care of me? You can see right here, my partner is going to take care of me. I think it's fascinating. 34% say that their children are going to take care of me, yet 77% don't want them to. A little off on those numbers, but let's come back to that partner, right? So that's whom we're expecting to take care of us. But remember, there might not be a spouse around. Why? Death? Divorce? Senior widows outnumber senior men. Senior widow women outnumber senior widow men 4-to-1. It means 45% of women age 65 or over are widowed, right? There's a number that are divorced as well. So can we count on our spouse being there to take care of us? Hopefully so, but what if they are not? And a significant amount of folks don't have that person in place. So who's going to pay for it? Again, it's going to come down to personal savings. This is what a lot of people are expecting. 63% are just going to plan on using their resources. Now, some people are expecting Social Security and Medicare. And Medicare is not designed to pay for long-term care costs. Medicare is very good, and supplements are designed to pay for acute care. You get hurt or sick and are likely to get better. Chronic care is you're hurt or sick, likely not going to get better. So if we do think Medicare is going to pay for those expenses, most of us are going to be in a situation where we're going to be very disappointed when it comes to who's going to pay the bills. The other thing that I think is interesting is 17% of us are expecting Medicaid to take care of us. Now, what is Medicaid? Medicaid is the state. That's the county. If you ever talk to grandma and grandpa, they said, we don't want to go to the county, right? They're talking about Medicaid. And Medicaid is the state or the county dictating where your care is. They're paying for it, but they put liens on all your property. How do you qualify for Medicaid, by the way? You have to basically be down to nothing. You have $3,000 of assets. Everything else has to be spent on your care. Well, if you have a community spouse, which is a spouse that's not in a facility, that spouse can't keep a lot of money of other assets. And that other spouse that's not in the long-term care facility gets to keep that kind of income. Spouse gets to keep the house. Is that really the retirement we're hoping for our spouse? Probably not. So Medicaid is there for people that can't do anything about it. Again, it's a safety net, and it's there, and it will take care of people. But we have a choice. Not putting that on the county or the state is probably the way that we ultimately want to go. So let's talk a little bit about the experience. So a third of our consumers in the study have had close family members receive long-term care. What I want to point out here is if you're doing long-term care planning, these are the two numbers I want to focus on. One is 48% of those that had a loved one in long-term care facilities said it was more expensive than they expected. So building long-term care, think about that's what the kids or the people paying for it are saying. Number two, needed care longer than expected. 33% said we were paying for care longer than we thought. So again, if you're doing long-term care planning, those are two things I think are really important in understanding why those long-term care policies were maybe suboptimal. Long-term care insurance. So I just want to touch on this real briefly. This is fairly straightforward. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this essentially is traditional insurance. So long-term care policy will typically be the lowest initial cost. If you never need care or never need benefits, the benefits are not returned to the family. So it's like any other traditional insurance. You pay for something, bad things happen, you receive benefits. If no bad things happen, you don't. That's traditional long-term care. We're aware of that. Asset-based or hybrid long-term care. I just want to read this because I want to make sure people are understanding what the hybrid space is. Asset-based long-term care is designed to pay a benefit if you need long-term care services. This could take the form of life insurance or annuities with long-term care benefits that would pay the face amount for care needed. Asset-based plans are generally funded in a single premium or through additional ongoing premiums. And then there's tax benefits as well. So asset-based long-term care is a little different from long-term care in how it's actually funded. So when the study went through the asset-based long-term care option, there was some feedback from the consumers. And this is what the consumers said after learning more about the hybrid or asset-based long-term care. 3/4 of consumers had never heard of those solutions. So when learning about long-term care, a number of consumers, what were they actually looking for? So if we could sort of transition, this is another good place where you can take a picture, write this down. If you are looking at long-term care, these are really good questions to ask or things to research. This is what was the most researched topics. Price, obviously, we've talked about, but level of care, length of care, flexibility, locations, ratings, those are all things that I think are really important when thinking about and developing long-term care. And why did people do it? Again, we talked about financial burdens. So now let's talk a little bit about the asset-based protection. So this is where we're going to be in the annuity and life insurance space. So we're hybrid or asset-based is the term that we typically use in the industry. So among consumers, only 1/4 of people were aware that there were alternatives to traditional long-term care insurance. And I want to highlight a couple numbers right here. So again, 26% of people were aware that there are other options other than traditional long-term care. And then when presented with the asset-based long-term care option, 69% of people thought that that was extremely appealing or somewhat appealing. So this was really striking an accord with people. They were very interested in learning more about the asset-based. And why were they interested in learning about the asset-based? I'm not going to read every one of these, but I'm going to highlight a couple things. Number one on people's lists is they learned that the premiums do not increase with asset-based long-term care. Benefits do not change. And then I think this one, I always thought able to pass unused amounts to heirs was the number one reason, and it's high, 84%, but there's other reasons why people are interested in asset-based long-term care planning. So again, I think what this does is emphasizes or highlights some of those reasons. And so would somebody potentially buy a hybrid or an asset-based strategy? A significant portion would. So 44% would definitely or probably, with another 47% saying they might. That's a significant portion of people that would look into this strategy. So again, what are other people looking into? Is they're very intrigued with asset-based, and that makes sense. So what's the preference? 66% of people say, well, asset-based would be my preference, where 14% are still focused on traditional long-term care, and 20% are probably still confused. They don't really have a preference one way or another. So as we start to wrap things up on this conversation of long-term care and what do people think, again, what we want to do is we want to encourage people to do something. So what are some things that you can do? Look at your options while you have your health. And we really didn't talk a lot about that in today's conversation. There's a fair amount of people out there that might be considered uninsurable with traditional long-term care. The asset-based strategy is where a lot of people are going. There's a lot of solutions out there for people that have high risks or have things that they're doctoring for. There's a lot of asset-based strategies that are picking those people up and providing some extra insurance on top of their own dollars. So, but the point is, if you have your health, you have more options. So we're all healthy until we're not. So if you've got your health, now's an optimal time to look into it. Things often go up in price too as we get older. Number two, we're doing this to relieve your family on the burden of making these decisions, right? We talked about those 3 decisions right off the bat. Make those decisions. If you choose not to do any long-term care insurance planning, at least you can answer the questions of where is care going to be happening and who's going to take care of my care as well. And if one of the hesitations is really cost or how am I going to pay for it, look at building a financial plan or a retirement income plan so you understand where the baseline is, to understand if there's unallocated dollars out there or if new dollars can go towards different parts of your overall financial plan, i.e. long-term care planning. So those are 3 really great places to start. So as we start to wrap things up, I want to thank everybody again for supporting our spring series of workshops, and hopefully we see you back here in the fall, August, September, October. We'll definitely talk about taxes. We'll talk about other great stuff as well. Focus on what we always focus on, which is education, motivation, and additional information to help encourage you to make your decisions. One of those pieces, by the way, Nationwide does a really cool packet. They ask a few questions and they predict your how long you'd be in long-term care, the cost. It's actually a pretty cool little tool to use. So if you want one of these, we can help you access one of these through Nationwide as well. So as we said earlier, we want to be able to provide resources to hopefully encourage you to get more information, to make some decisions to improve your long-term care plan. So we're here as a resource for long-term care consultations. It could be on the insurance side, it could be talking through what's being done, options that are out there. We're here as a resource. Those are complimentary conversations. We're happy to send you a couple of these Nationwide pieces that we spoke about today. Again, you can go ahead and chat those if you would like. We're happy to help build a complimentary income plan for you as well so you can understand how are you doing. And as always, we've got recordings. You can go out to the YouTube page and you can find all of our recordings, or if that's not necessarily your gig, feel free to chat or reach out to us with any of the recordings that you would like from any of our past workshops. We're happy to provide that to you. Feel free to send those to family and friends that could potentially benefit as well. Again, we're here as a resource. So again, you can chat any of those things right now. If you don't feel comfortable chatting that, there's my email addresses up there. Feel free to send me an email requesting any information or sharing any other insight as well. So as Brittany talked about right at the beginning, there could be some chat questions that are out there. We're going to move into our Q&A in just a minute. So now is a great time to get to the chat feature and start putting some of those questions in. But I want to congratulate everybody for taking time to learn more about this particular topic. There's a lot of folks out there that are putting their head in the sand. They say it's never going to happen to me, but the fact that you all are taking time out of your day to learn about this topic. I compliment you. If we can be a resource or a service to help you pass this, then we would love to be able to be that as well. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Brittany, for the opportunity as well. Back to you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for all the wonderful information, and thank you to all of you who have come to gain that education, that information. As we transition to our Q&A portion of the workshop, I do want to remind everyone, as Mike was just saying, that you can ask your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom and send the questions to hosts and panelists. So to begin, thank you again for being back here. It's always wonderful to have you, and you are so great in providing such wonderful information. Like you said, it's something that we hope we never have to use, but we know there's a good chance we might. So I'll just kick off the questions right away. Someone said that they heard qualifying for long-term care is challenging. Is that true?
Thanks for having me back, by the way. It's great to be here. Is long-term care hard to qualify? That's probably a health question, right? Because we often say with insurances is you buy it with your health, right? You pay for it with your check or your assets. So it's changed tremendously as far as how companies look at those risks. We all know that as utilization continues to go higher and higher, Brittany, from 40% to 50% to 60%, well, insurance companies have to pay those dollars out. So they've had a hard time pricing that. And we've heard about the stories of long-term care potentially going up in price. But the other way that insurance companies are trying to mitigate that risk is put good health people into those risk pools. And it's for somebody who owns long-term care insurance, I want the healthiest people in my risk pool because that manages my costs as well. But what's happening, Brittany, is some of those people maybe that don't qualify for traditional long-term care, those hybrid products that I spoke about earlier, asset-based, are picking a lot of people up that traditional long-term care doesn't want, or they're not going to put in the risk pool. So I think 4 or 5 years ago, before some of the massive innovation in the hybrid space happened, I think that's absolutely the answer. I would say today, a lot of those people now have solutions that they didn't have in the past.
Wonderful. Okay. You mentioned $200 a month can go a long way. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. It's always hard putting numbers like that up there. But what I was really trying to get across is we have this stereotype, right? And I remember talking to somebody in financial services years ago that was coming to this point. I said, have you done long-term care? He said, Mike, I heard it's really expensive. And I said, what's expensive? And he said, like $1,000 a month. I said, of course, that is expensive. But you can build long-term care policies so many different ways. There's these levers that you have in building long-term care. And so you don't always have to have the Cadillac plan, if I could use that term. What we typically, I tell people all the time is, for me in many cases, it's a reverse engineering exercise. It's what fits in the budget, and then I build the best plan I possibly can. And depending on age and health, there's factors that go into that. You can still get $40, $50, $100, $150,000 of insurance for a couple $100 a month. And if you need it, if you're paying out $15,000 a month, that goes a long way in helping with choice and, again, that burden issue that we spoke about earlier.
Absolutely. I'm actually going to jump to a question that I think is kind of related to that. It says, how much life insurance, presumably this is one of those hybrid options, how much life insurance would I need to qualify for $300 per month of long-term care benefits?
Great question. Thanks for asking. Again, that's always challenging because age, tobacco, typical life insurance type of questions. What's nice about, again, with that, I guess the good answer is depending on that age, depending on the health, the nice thing is you can go to the insurance company and say, what can I get? And the insurance company comes back and says 100,000, 150, 200, whatever that number is. Again, that goes a long way. That's 50,000, it's 100,000 more to my kids in charity because I've done some kind of planning. So it's all going to be based on age, tobacco, normal life insurance underwriting. What I will tell you, and I think it was sort of put in that, here's what long-term care insurance is if you want the maximum long-term care benefit, traditional long-term care insurance is the best leverage.
Okay.
Now, people run into situations say, well, again, I'd like to do dual purposes, or I don't want to pay for something I don't get. Well, then there's strategies out there. You might not get as much leverage as you would with traditional long-term care insurance.
Got it.
Great question.
And with these hybrids, do you have to increase both the same amount, or can you increase the long-term care without increasing the life insurance, for instance?
So if I'm understanding the question, what's actually nice, Brittany, if I can maybe take that, is some of us are out there that have maybe something in place. Maybe we got a little long-term care policy. Mm-hmm. Well, you can complement that with an asset-based strategy. So you can just put that beside, because many of us have done long-term care plan. We're like, maybe it's going to be longer, maybe it's going to be costlier. I don't really want to buy more long-term care insurance. Blending those together often is a great fit.
Wonderful. If one spouse is uninsurable, would you still encourage the other spouse to get long-term care insurance?
100%. We get this all the time, and I get a little feisty about this topic. But if one spouse gets denied, then a lot of times it'll be like, okay, we're not going to do anything, and that's a knee-jerk reaction in some cases. It's a frustration that they didn't get it, but something is better than nothing, right? And if you can't get it, there's a reason. Right? Insurance companies have a pretty good predictability. They don't know everybody specifically that's going to need long-term care, but they have a good idea with that particular health issue, how many of those people are going to need care. So if that person, the healthy spouse, hopefully will be around to take care of that other spouse. Well, who's going to take care of that person, right? Because the one that's not going to qualify might go first. So that one that's left holding the bag, and we talked about that. Long-term care is a women's issue, right? In many cases, it's the woman that's the one taking care of the man. And if the man comes and says, "I was declined, we're not doing anything," I just feel terrible for that spouse sitting behind, saying, "They're the one that needs it."
Yeah.
So absolutely, 100%, something's better than nothing.
Makes a lot of sense. Can you use qualified money to buy asset-based long-term care?
Great question. That's a really good question, because many of us have done a good job saving in our retirement accounts, right? Our IRAs, and again, now we got this mountain of money, we don't know how to turn it into income. So long-term care insurance is usually a pay-as-you-go. Well, these asset-based, you can take a lump sum. There are some companies that allow you to use qualified money to do a hybrid product. Not every company does. There's a lot of them that only will use non-qualified, non-IRA 401k money, but there are companies out there that allow you to use qualified money.
So it's not an industry or government standardized, it's by company.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, okay. What are examples of monthly premiums or costs for hybrid plans? Like, what is there a range?
Sure, that's a function of, a lot of times what we'll do. So let me back up. It's kind of back to that life insurance question we just had, right? $300. But what's unique, some of our companies, I'm thinking like in the life insurance space on this, what you can do is you can do a lump sum. So maybe you do 30, 40,000, and that lessens my monthly premium. Or some might not do any lump sum and has a little larger monthly premium. So when you do asset-based, usually you're using an asset as a portion of that. So some people, Brittany, they'll just use an asset and they're done. They won't even have a monthly premium. So it's sort of both numbers are put together. But again, that's a great situation where you can say, I have this X number, the CD, this investment over here that I'm probably not going to touch, or it's going to the kids. Well, maybe I can take a portion of that and lever it up, get a little more protection, and then maybe put $200 a month because that fits my budget. And that just expands the benefits that they ultimately get.
Nice. What if you're already in your 60s? How does that affect premiums and ability to get it?
It's less than your 70s. I mean, I think I always get that question, I wish I would have done it earlier. And that's in everything, right? But especially in risk management. If you have the health, 60 is still better than 62 or 65 or 67 or 70. So again, I think it comes down to, this is not free, right? We're transferring risk. We're spending money to transfer risk. If the problem is there and the resources are there to be able to pay for it, that's a risk. That risk is massive risk. And if I can take a portion of my dollars to pay for that risk, I certainly would, even if I'm in my 60s. Or we do it for clients in their 70s too. They wish they would have done it in their 60s.
Wonderful. Well, if anyone has any last questions, please feel free to send them along. Just want to thank you again. It's so wonderful to have you here, and I hope you enjoy your summer off.
Thanks for giving me my summer off.
This time, we'll see if it happens. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you so much to everyone for attending today's Spring Speaker Series and today's presentation, Planning for Long-Term Care Risk. Thank you to Mike. He's always so wonderful to have here. Again, Mike Becker with Legacy Financial Partners. We want to thank all of our staff, Caleb, Christian, Zena, Jackie, Nicole, Joshua, Beth, on days like this, Aaron. To request a recording of any of our previous workshops or to follow up with questions, you can always email Mike, or you can email workshops@mnhealthagents.com. And as a reminder, Alexander & Haberman is a specialty firm focused on assisting with Medicare Advantage, supplements, and Part D plans, as well as individual and family plans on and off exchange, and group benefits including health, dental, and vision. Thank you, everyone. I don't see any other questions coming in, so I hope everyone has a wonderful summer, whether it's off like Mike or not. And we're so happy to have everyone here and to be here. Thank you.